Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the thematic webinar on the impacts of transport electrification on the electricity grid. My name is Katharina Krell. I'm a thematic expert for low carbon economy of the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform, and I will be one of your two moderators today. Before we're going into the topic, let me briefly explain the technical aspects of the webinar software and how to interact with us. We are in the GoToWebinar tool, and this tool provides the opportunity for the participants to ask questions and to send comments through the questions tab. You find the questions tab on the right, where you have your webinar control panel. Pretty much at the bottom, there's a tab that is called questions. You can click on it and you can type your questions there, and it will arrive at the organizers. We will take questions directly after individual presentations, if they are directly related to the presenters. Or if there are more general questions, we will group them and have them in the discussion round at the end. Further below in your control panel on the right, you find the handout section. You can also click on there. This is where we will put documents that we want to share and make available to you. There is already one handout there for you to see. Yep. This webinar is recorded, and the recordings are being made available the following day, including all presentations. So you will receive all of these. All right, a few words about the organizers. This webinar is organized by the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform in cooperation with the Interreg Europe project Setup. It is the first time that we have a joint organization and a joint moderation between one of our projects and the policy learning platforms. So I'm very happy to have a co-moderator, which I will present a little bit later to you today. The Interreg Europe program you probably all know, that is funding interregional cooperation projects. You might not know the policy learning platform, which is today's organizer. The policy learning platform is the second pillar of the Interreg Europe program and is fostering also interregional policy learning, but making sure that the knowledge flows across the individual project consortia and that the knowledge is made available to all European regions, be they participating in Interreg Europe projects or not. We want to draw attention to relevant good practices and experiences in one region that might be of interest to policymakers and practitioners in another region. And of course, to create links between the practitioners, the regional experts working on similar topics. Now, to this end, the policy learning platform organizes online and offline events like this one. We write so-called policy briefs, we analyze good practices from the regions, and we also carry out personalized services like peer reviews. In the area of mobility, we have recently held a thematic event on citizen-focused mobility 2 weeks ago. We have held online seminars on last-mile mobility solutions and on e-mobility, and we have written policy briefs on SUMS, demand responsive transport, active modes of transport, and also e-mobility. E-mobility is a hot topic, it's a new topic, and it comes with many new challenges that are technical, economic, and political. And we are here today to discuss specifically the impacts of transport electrification on the electricity grid and to explore solutions to mitigate the potential negative effects. One of our experts, Hugo Niesing from the Dutch company Resourcefully, has prepared a video and will give us an introduction into the topic.
all cities nowadays are having high ambitions, both in contributing to a new society which causes less emissions of CO2, and both mobility and energy have a very, very big share of that. We heat, light and cook with energy. That energy can be made in cities. We are also moving ourselves a lot. E-mobility uses also a lot of energy. If we grow to a clean energy systems in the city, that means that we will make use of solar. A lot of cities have ambitious solar plants. Solar makes most of its energy during the midst of the day, while we are using most of our energy during the beginning and the end of the day. If you create big peaks in offer and big peaks in demand, which happen at different times of the day, you create a system which needs to digest, in fact, all that energy peaks. If you are able to get those together, the production peak can temper the demand peaks. And then we can have more clean energy being consumed in either the buildings of our cities or being translated into mobility. Now, mobility is very flexible when it becomes electric, because you can charge your car at any time of the day as long as it's connected. And you need it only a couple of hours a day. In fact, a car is 80 to 90% standing still. Only 10 to 20% it's moving. So the moments of putting the excess of renewable energy of a city into a car can serve our whole energy system. On top of that, an electric car can double or triple the energy demand from a family. And that can cause a heavy, heavy burden on the grid if we are introducing massively e-mobility in our cities. So it's a question of combining two developments which both have an ambition to make a better society, but can hurt each other, but when well integrated, they complement and enforce each other.
Yes, that was the introduction from Hugo Niesing from the EV Energy Interact Europe project. So you have heard it. An electric vehicle can double or triple the energy demand of a household. And if we understand that everybody has the same preferences in charging, for example, when they come home from work, plug in the car in the electric charger at home, we will have a very, very high peak, a new peak, and it will exert a lot of stress on the grid. So this is all that this is about, and without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce Olly Frankland from Regen, partner in the Setup project. Olly, hi.
How are we doing?
Good, and you?
Very
all
good.
Right.
Very good.
Your banner is nicer than my banner, I can see.
Well placed. Right. Well placed. Yeah.
Well placed. So Olly is my co-moderator today, and Olly is also giving us the introductory keynote, going a little bit more in depth of the challenges and announcing already a couple of potential solutions to this new stress on our electricity grid. Olly, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Katarina. I'll just load up my presentation. 1 second. There we go. Okay, yes, my name is Olly Frankland, and I'm a project manager at a company called Regen. We are an independent centre of energy expertise and market insight in the UK. And the reason I'm here today to talk to you about e-mobility is because we are an advisory partner on the Setup project, which stands for Smart Energy Transition to Upgrade Regional Performance, and is looking to try and share good practices on smart grids and to ensure that we have the best business models, consumer engagement and funding opportunities that are available across the EU, and we have a number of partners across the continent. So we've got Andalusia, Brittany, a number of others, and what we've been doing over the last few years is sharing knowledge and doing regular project meetings. And one of the key things that's been coming up is the electric vehicle transition and the revolution that we're seeing in the electric mobility space at the moment. So I've just got a few minutes here to outline a little introduction about that space and what's changing at the moment. So first of all, we're seeing a significant uptick in sales. So this is a graphic showing the increase in sales across some of the major markets in the EU, the kind of 6 major markets for cars. And this is battery electric vehicle sales only, so it's not including any plug-in hybrids or hybrids. This is just pure battery vehicles. And what it shows really is just the really big uptake we've seen from last year in the kind of darker blue there, and this year in the green. Some doubling, some quadrupling of sales in certain markets, really buoyant sales across the EU. I think in total, the EU has seen a doubling in battery electric vehicle sales over the last year, if we're talking about these particular timeframes, Q1 to Q3. But I think that has to be looked at in context, because we are still seeing it as a relatively small percentage of the total sales. So 3%, the graphic there in the green slice is electrically charged vehicles, so that's plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles together still only represent 3% of sales, but when you add that with the hybrid electric vehicle sales, that kind of comes up, and alternative power vehicle sales, that comes up to a bigger slice, say 11%. So we're seeing really strong growth, but from quite a low base. But that's really exciting to see that significant growth over the last year and last couple of years, perhaps. And one of the key drivers for that is fleets. So the likes of delivery services, for example. I've just pulled out a couple of case studies here. The one from DHL, they went out a couple of years ago to try and find a solution, an electric van that would meet their requirements. Could not find anything on the market, so decided to manufacture themselves, and I think have made around 10,000 or so of these electric vans so far. And another example there in the green, I was just in London last week and saw a number of these Royal Mail electric delivery vans, which is a Mercedes e-Vito, and they're rolling out 200 in the last month as part of a big commercial electric vehicle trial called Optimize Prime with one of the largest DSOs in the UK. And I would also highlight the EV100 by the Climate Group, which is kind of an initiative to try and bring together large corporates and get them to commit to electrifying their fleets over the next few years. So again, really good ambition and quite a lot of change in the fleet space and fleet electrification. So it was a couple of years ago, we had a lot of scare stories, I suppose, in terms of, well, what happens when all these electric vehicles go home and plug in and charge at the evening peak between 4 and 7. And there's a couple of stories here on the screen, one saying that you would need 20 more nuclear power stations to power electric cars, or 3.5 gigawatts by 2030, really negative stories potentially around this electric vehicle revolution that we're seeing. And I think that's not underestimating that there is a challenge in terms of integrating this. So there's a challenge in terms of allowing all these electric vehicles to charge in terms of the national peak or European peak demand. And that's a fairly significant, but I think we'll talk throughout this webinar about some solutions that might be available to mitigate that, to allow us to charge at the right times. But there's also bringing it down a step to the local energy challenge. When we get a number of vehicles in a street or in a little village or a town or in a suburb, we get kind of clustering. That can also cause a significant problem that is also potentially likely to happen a bit quicker. So if we have millions of electric vehicles over the next 5 or 6 years, we're likely to see that clustering in certain areas. So this is a particular problem. So this graphic shows it. So if you have a particular substation with a particular limit, if they all these electric vehicles come home and charge at the same time, that limit could be breached, and we may have some supply problems. So this is the problem. So what are the solutions? Well, there are a number of solutions. One is targeted network investment. So we can reinforce the network to allow it to deal with, or to take and have more capacity to take that increase in demand. So that would be digging up the roads, increasing the size of the substation, laying more lines, and would be, if we did it for all of the electric vehicle chargers, all of the electric vehicles, fairly expensive, and it's also fairly disruptive as well. But it's definitely going to be a part of the solution for sure. We've also got local flexibility markets. So this is where the DSO or the TSO or supplier may come out to assets that are flexible. So they can either turn their demand down, or they can increase their generation. So they have a bit of flexibility, or they can shift their demand potentially. So they would be able to buy that, the DSO would buy that flexibility from, be that a generation asset owner or a large industrial user with a large amount of refrigeration, for example. So this is again an option for capacity to be available by using a local flexibility market, allowing for that capacity to be available. And there's a number of examples across Europe. This is a broad graphic looking at the different, lots of different projects that are involved in flexibility. I would just highlight Piclo, which is a local example to the UK. I'm a little bit biased, but it's the way they describe it is kind of like a matchmaking service for generation or flexibility providers and DSOs. So they just provide a service to match those guys up in specific areas, normally grouped around a substation, for example. So I'd recommend to have a quick look at that, and there's some sources there if you'd like to check that out further. So, and finally, we've got smart charging. So if we can charge our vehicles in an intelligent, optimized way, and so that might be at a slightly different time of the day, or that might be slightly a different percentage. So instead of charging at 100%, they might be charged at 50%, and sharing that capacity amongst a street or a neighborhood to allow everyone to get a charge and to have a full charge by the morning. But it won't necessarily mean that everyone's charging at 100% all of the time. And this is kind of ensuring that what you need in order to allow this smart charging to happen is charge points which are controllable. They can respond to a signal, and they can be optimized to make sure we stay below that limitation, that grid capacity limit that might be on the substation, or depending on what the area the characteristics are. So I think we're going to kind of move on to a couple of really good practices that look at some of these ops solutions in a little bit more detail, and I think we'll just have a little quick discussion about it now with Katarina, and go on to the good practices after that.
Thank you, Olly. Yes, I guess nobody wants to see a number of new nuclear power plants being built, especially to power our so-called transition to a low-carbon economy. Yes, well, you've mentioned mainly three approaches to reduce the stress on the grid. The first one is infrastructure investment. You mentioned only the substation level, but would it also mean adding additional generation capacity? I guess yes, if nothing else is being done, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there a general acceptance that we're going to see a massive uptake in more renewable energy. So, part of that renewable energy capacity would be needed in order to deliver the supply for electrified transport and electric vehicles, for sure. So, definitely an increase in wind, solar, offshore wind. All of the renewable energy technologies will be needed as well, for sure.
Yeah, well, that we need anyway to green our electricity mix. I mean,
exactly.
I'm coming from a country like Germany, where we still have a big share of electricity being generated from coal, and we're ending it only in, you know, later than most of the other European countries. So that we need anyway, but we need the renewables to shift out the coal, and we need it to have more capacity, generation capacity overall. Well, the other two options are local flexibility markets, and you mentioned that flexibility can be bought, and smart charging. The question is probably the three solutions: infrastructure investments, local flexibility markets, and smart charging. It's probably something that has to happen all together. It's not like one can fix the challenge all by itself, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's going to be a part to play for all of that, and it really depends on the specific location, the specific conditions, and there will be a need for more targeted network investment for sure. But I suppose we'd probably want to try and limit that to a certain extent, because that can be fairly expensive. So the benefits of smart charging and local flexibility markets is that they should be able to kind of reduce that cost in terms of upgrades and make best use of the current assets we have available, and maximize the efficiency of those wires that we already have in place, those substations, those grid transformers that are already there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the best understanding of the costs that are related to infrastructure. We don't know yet so well the costs for introducing local flexibility markets and smart charging, but the feeling is it will be way cheaper, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. A smarter, more efficient, cheaper option. And I mean, there's some early indications on how much a local flexibility market might be in terms of value for a generator or a flexibility provider. But yeah, I think that market is really in its early stages and it's developing. So we'll see over the next few years how it unfolds.
All right, good. So I don't think we have any questions from the audience yet. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first good practice presenter. It is Avi Ganesan from Resourcefully from the Netherlands, who I invite to join us. Turn on your camera. Hello, Avi.
Hi, Avi.
Hi, thanks, Katharina. Olly, can you see me fine?
Yes, we see you fine. You're welcome to share your screen now and start your presentation. You have a very interesting example on local flexibility markets. Please tell us all about it.
Sure. Okay, so thanks everyone. Thanks for your time. I'm a colleague of Hugo Niesing that you saw at the start of this webinar. And he has his apologies. I'll be speaking on behalf of him. And so what I'll be talking about specifically is to put this discussion into the perspective of a real case study, a study that we've done for a local municipality here near to Amsterdam, where we're based in the Netherlands. So just to start off, to give you a bit of a teaser, it's the gemeente Amstelveen. It's within the metropolitan region of Amsterdam, and they are planning a new suburb on the edge of their municipality area, and they asked us to advise on, well, what does it mean to make this suburb a smart suburb? What if we pursue that, what Olly was saying, the third option of using flexibility so that we can minimize the costs involved in network upgrades for the area, that we can ensure that there's maximum local energy production by renewable means. So that means in this case solar. So just to start you off, I'll give you 3 headline items that came out of our study, and then I'll proceed. So let's start from the left. So we've got 32% of higher use of local solar power due to flexibility. And this is all calculated from a data that we collect, that we model, and optimization algorithms that we've developed. And I'll talk about that in a bit later on. We've also seen 60% reduction in peak power sent into the grid. So as much as there are peaks coming out of the grid into the houses or buildings, as you saw from peaks caused from EV charging, there's also peak power from surplus solar energy going into the grid. And that is as problematic for the grid as the power going the other side. So it sort of works 2 ways. And for here, we've also looked at that benefit as well. And in this case, for Amstelveen, they were looking at, okay, what does it mean to get the new houses in our new suburb to nul optimator, or basically energy neutrality? And that means you're producing as much energy over the year as you're consuming. And for that, we calculated that for each house, on average, you'd need an 8.3 kilowatt solar PV installation, which is large, but not massive, if you'd like. So that's my teaser. Let's go on to who we are. So who is Resourcefully? We're a small urban energy transition consultancy based in Amsterdam. We work mainly on project management and setup of European innovation projects, such as in Interreg Europe and the other programs, as well as also at the national and local scale. We do policy and business advisory also, mainly on these projects, as well as develop our own technology and modeling solutions, so that we can advise cities with data-based information. So on your right of the screen, you'll see that we've got, you'll see this graph used in many places nowadays. It seems to be copied around, but this is basically showing what Olly had, as in the top one shows how you've got your morning peak, you've got your evening peak as usual, but the extra demand of EVs is additional on top of that, and it doesn't really match with when the sun is shining. So that's when everybody comes home at 6 o'clock and plugs their car in at the garage or on the street. So once you do the optimization, on the bottom graph, you see that the cars, the EVs, go from a part of the problem to become a part of the solution. So as you see, it's charging, instead of that peak times, it's charging either late at night or during the solar hours. And then that green part is the release, what they call vehicle to grid, V2G. So the car is acting as a battery itself and releasing energy into the grid to reduce the peaks even further, as well as stabilize the grid. So our mission is to accelerate Europe's urban energy transition. And in this case, I'll talk about our work with Amstelveen. So with Amstelveen, they're planning a new neighborhood, as I was saying. Their ambition is to be a fossil-free city by 2040, to build a new sustainable residential area and possibly look at energy neutrality. They want to look at how they can maximize the use of local solar energy production to lower CO2 emissions as much as possible. They would also like to consider different scenarios of electric mobility. So what does it look like right now in terms of ownership of EVs, and what does it look like in 10 years' time? What does it look by 2040 when hopefully everyone there will have an electric car, if they need it. They would also like to be off of gas. And here in the Netherlands, there's of course a big push for the local municipalities to get off gas, and there are subsidies available for that as well to households. And at this point, we're looking at, okay, what does it mean to get off gas? That means electrifying everything a household does. So not only mobility, but also water heating, cooking, space heating. And of those things, especially the mobility and space heating are the two biggest contributors to an increase both in consumption, but also in that peak that you saw, the peak in electricity demand. So they're the biggest contributors to the problem. And just to highlight that issue over here, we've got the EV charging data here. So this is, this graph you see in front of you is actual demand data that we monitor from one household who has an EV in a prosumer community in Amsterdam. That's a producing consumer, if you like. So that's a household with solar PV. And you see here that the part in the blue block shows this block of demand from the EVs, or one EV being charged in. So in this case, it's a Tesla. This is actually one of Hugo's neighbors in his neighborhood. And you'll see here that this Tesla is charging at 11 kilowatts consistently. And if you compare that to the rest of the day, you'll see what that means in terms of energy. It's massive jump in terms of both the amplitude or the power of that, but also just that the area under the graph represents the kilowatt hours, or the amount of energy that's consumed. And you can see that it's just out of proportion with the rest of the household. And you can see there in the text, I've put that with only 3 EVs for the 23 households that we monitor, demand has risen by a fifth, so 20%. So you can imagine that, you know, in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years time, with the growth in EVs, how this can really impact the grid and the infrastructure that is needed to supply this sort of behavior of consumption. So going back to the Amstelveen case, let's talk about the key challenges. And this applies pretty much everywhere, I would think, starting by the split incentives. So there's many types of split incentives that you can think of. For example, when as a local government that you were planning to build a new neighborhood, you would like the houses to be sustainable and well built and not use energy, and a house lives on for 30 up to 40, 50 years on as a city's infrastructure. However, the builder just wants to make money at this point, and they don't really have a responsibility for how the house will perform in, say, 10 years or 20 years down the line. So for them, they would like to build it as cheaply as possible right now, so that they can make the most benefits, and that's normal. That's just your profit incentive. However, there is a mismatch of incentive there. There are other sorts of incentives, such as people who are producing their own solar energy for their household. If they have the roof is covered with solar panels, do they have an incentive to use their own solar energy instead of using it from the grid? So, for example, in the Netherlands, currently, what you export into the grid is paid the same as what you're consuming from the grid. So you don't really have an incentive to prioritize the use of your local solar energy. Or perhaps you can also incentivize your neighbor to use your own surplus solar. So we'll talk about these incentives in more detail at the end of this session. There are also, in terms of municipalities, there are also few in-house expert resources that can really assess these situations. You know, normal planners, city planners are just not equipped to deal with the sort of complicated energy side, and let alone and also looking at optimized flexible use of energy as well. And adding to that, there's a lot of options. You know, if you want to heat your house with electricity, you've got, even before going to electricity, there's your district heating. You've got your biomass or biogas options. Then there's heat pumps, electric resistance heaters, electric storage resistance heaters, heaters with storage tanks, no storage tanks. So there's tons of options to go, and it's really, at first glance, it's difficult to make a sort of a pro and con assessment or cost-benefit assessment of those options. And for most, there is a lack of data around. So when we go to talk to municipalities and we want to know, okay, your new suburb, you know, how many, or your existing suburb, if you're changing, if you're looking to renovate that, what is the household consumption profile per household of this type or that type? Most of them will not have a clue, because they might have maybe one single number for the entire year for the entire neighborhood, and that's the extent of data that they have. So all of this means that it's really difficult to engage stakeholders to make this transition or to pose a certain concept. Because if you don't have something concrete to show, how could you talk to the builders, to the planners, to the lawyers even, or the network operators? So having something concrete to talk about as a government is really important in engaging stakeholders and bringing them through this journey. So in that, just quickly, I'll go through our process, how we work with governments. I won't go through it in too much detail. So once we start a plan, we'll be looking at either briefly as a new suburb or existing suburb. We'll see what the plan is. If it's a new suburb, what are the goals? As for the existing suburb, we will identify a lack of data. And then, as I said, we have our models of collected and modeled data that we use to estimate the rest of the information that is necessary to then look at, okay, what are the goals that are being looked here, and then to develop scenarios. So do they want to see what happens if there is 100% coverage of solar? So if every rooftop was covered with solar, where it's applicable, what would it look like? Or what would it mean if 70% of people had electric cars, or these sorts of scenarios? And then we would use our algorithms to then analyze that, and out of that we will produce communications material to help the municipality.
Avi, you have 2 minutes. You are already over your time. Please speed up a little bit. You have good conclusions at the end. I want you to please.
Thank you. Okay, let me skip through a bit of this. This is just showing what data is needed. About data is really important. I can't stress this more. If you look at analyzing data, you can really look at what are the user profiles, what are the, for example, trends in the growth of fast chargers. That has a massive impact on your grid, as well as looking at different profiles of different strategies for flexibility, whether you just delay it or you put it into the solar hours, or you can cut and shift it around, depending on consumer preference as well. Here's my second last slide, showing just the results of this analysis, just a part of it. Here on the graph, you see that the peak, what was the business as usual consumption is that dotted line, and the flexible, the demand with flexibility is the blue line with the area, and you see a massive shift down in the peak of demand because we are shifting the let's say, the space heating demand and mobility demand, where it can be done, into the solar hours or into the midnight off-peak hours. And you can see this is an example of a flyer that we produced as part of supporting the municipality in engaging internally as well as externally. And so here's my last slide, just to conclude with recommendations. We would, from our experience, would really like to suggest that, you know, it's about EVs, but it's also, if you look at it more holistically, there's electrification of everything, and that needs to be paid attention to, because, you know, electrifying space heating, you know, replacing gas heaters will also contribute a lot, will also double a household's consumption. So everything stacks up. So that's one thing. We need to increase cooperation of the stakeholders through engagement of the type I've shown you. Also through sharing of data. So if the local government doesn't have data, well, the DSO, the network operator will have data, or other energy companies. So having a shared data portal for the city is highly important as well. This third one is about the split incentives that I talked about, that they need to look into long-term performance guarantees. And that, in fact, is the idea for this Interreg Northwest Europe E=0 project. We were not directly involved in that, but just wanted to point that out here, to incentivize people to use locally produced renewable energy, since they're not using the whole of the grid that's going international and within the whole country. They're just using the grid within the local area. So why would they have to pay for that, for the sort of external costs? So to incentivize people to use locally produced renewable energy and to learn from the experience of other cities. And I'd like to point out two of the Interreg projects that are relevant, that we are involved in. C4City with Amsterdam, and Clean Mobile Energy with Arnhem and other cities around Europe are looking at exactly this issue and tackling these challenges. So, you know, through these Interreg programs as well, we're looking at really disseminating the experiences and the learnings and building on what's there. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thanks for your time, and yeah, look forward to your questions. If any, please feel free to contact us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Avi. So I think we have learned mainly that e-vehicles can be a big problem for the grid. If they are charging like in an unmanaged manner, then they're just a load. And they accentuate the problems that are already coming with the other increasing electrifications. However, if they are behaving in a managed way, they can even be part of a solution, because then the battery of the car can act like a storage and a buffer, and it can help flatten out the peaks that we experience anyway. So I think that is very, very interesting. So it can be either a huge problem or part of the solution.
Exactly. So, I mean, a lot in many places they're looking at, cities are looking at putting in large stationary batteries. These are basically shipping containers, sized as batteries, in to manage local electricity grids. But you could also do this with cars, potentially in the future when there are more electric cars, because, well, 80 to 90% of the time they are not being used. So, as Hugo said in the video, so they actually act as a battery in this case, in aggregate. So yes, there's definitely a lot of potential for them to be part of the solution.
Okay, so I have a question here from Guido. This one. The majority of users will drive only 20 to 70 kilometers per day when charging daily at home. Therefore, they charge only a few kilowatt hours. Otherwise, if they drive longer, or most likely, they will need to charge in other locations, right? And then if this scenario is considered, let's say, from the user point of view, not only by a theoretical energy demand based on battery capacity, Like, have you considered the scenario not only from a theoretical perspective, but from actually the demand?
Yes, for sure. So one of the first slides I was showing you was the actual data from a monitored prosumer community here in Amsterdam that we've been working with for the past number of years. And in that community, we've got so far three EV drivers who plug in at their own house, and we're working on them. We're working with them to see, okay, how does your electric vehicle charging affect your electricity bill, and what happens, and how can you adjust it, so that it is managed in a good way. And so, for example, that graph that I showed with that big block of EV charging, I kind of skipped through it, but you would see that the guy has moved his charging time from sort of that 6 to 8 time period, that peak time in the evening, to just after midnight, because his charging pole actually has the option to schedule in the charging time. So he has just scheduled it to turn on at 12 o'clock midnight and run from then on. And that's just a simple way of being flexible, if you like. So that's one of the ways. You don't need to have super smart algorithms to do flexibility. You can just move it into the midnight and time it. But of course, if we want to look at maximizing the use of local solar energy, then we would really need to have algorithms which look at, okay, what is the forecast for solar production tomorrow? Okay, then my car charging can be shifted from when I plug in at the office at 9 a.m., but it doesn't have to happen at 9 a.m. It can happen at 11 a.m. or 12 a.m. Or 12 p.m. and I'll be leaving the office at 5 p.m. anyway. So that's the sort of smartness that we talk about when we say smart and flexible use of energy.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question to that, Avi. Just in relating to how you get that flexibility in demand. So there's been a couple of trials here in terms of trying to provide like a kind of sunshine tariff, as it were. So you'd have periods of the day where you'd have much lower pricing, and then an indicator for consumers that there is some excess solar available that they can soak up, as it were.
Yeah.
Is that your approach as well? Is that the best approach in terms of just pricing in order to get that change in demand?
I think pricing is of course one of the major ways to do it. And in some countries you have time of use pricing for electricity. That's already an incentive, a major incentive for people to switch. Although in some cases you also need to work with awareness that in some cases people might not even know or care even if they're for example, EV drivers lately are not in the lower sort of socio-economic demographics, and maybe their electricity bill as a share of their disposable income is quite low, and they don't really care. So it's about raising awareness and saying, well, costs and price is one thing, but maybe there's other ways of offering incentives. For example, a creative one is, as part of the C4City project that I mentioned, the Amsterdam Johan Cruijff Arena, the soccer stadium, football stadium here, has installed a V2G charger to start the testing on, how can we offer an incentive for our customers parking that are coming to see a football match to give the arena energy instead of charging there. And one of the ways is to offer free drinks, free seats, maybe they're part of the box seats, and they get to invite a couple more of their mates into the box seat. There are other ways of doing it instead of money as well.
That is my cue. That is my cue, and I will use this cue to introduce our next speaker, who is going to present us a different solution where you don't work with incentives, but where you manage the access to the available power in a little bit top-down manner. So this is, I think, another interesting approach. And it is my pleasure to invite Nico Spoelstra. Nico, I hope your IT system is working. I hear your mic crashed. My Windows decided to restart, so I rushed down and occupied the camera slot of my colleague Simon. So I'm very, very lucky to be still online here. Nico, over to you. You have a totally different approach, a same solution, a different solution to the same challenge. You will present your company yourself. Over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me today. My name is Nico. I am a product manager at Greenflux. And today I will talk a bit about Greenflux, what we do, and then introduce two use cases of smart charging, one of those being the Electric Nation project. This was a very large project that we ran in the UK with a couple of partners, and you can find more information in the handouts. So Greenflux is a smart charging technology provider. We do a lot more than just smart charging. And our platform runs in the cloud and is used by, for example, energy suppliers, grid operators, also pure EV charging players, companies dedicated to EV charging networks. And through our connections worldwide, we are connected to millions of drivers with charge cards and hundreds of thousands of charge stations by now in 5 continents. Our platform is a platform used by charge point operators and EMSP service providers. And among the many products that we offer through this platform, the one I will talk about today is the smart charging product. Now, when we talk about smart charging in Greenflux, we like to get the definition straight. All our smart charging runs in the cloud. We have algorithms running there, taking inputs, converting it to outputs. And this output is always just a very simple command to a charging station that tells it to increase or decrease the maximum charge rate for an existing EV charging session. And that makes us able to handle a lot of different inputs from a lot of different stakeholders, sometimes at the same time, but also always reduce it to a very simple output that we send to the chargers. Now, the reason why you would want to do this, we identified 4. Sometimes you use all of them at the same instance. We talked about the grid constraints. They can often be very local. I'm going to show a use case where this comes to play. But you can also talk about opportunities that arise when you work with dynamic energy prices and you want to control the charging based on those prices and fluctuations. This, of course, can be very interesting to energy suppliers. You want to take into account user requirements, for example, coming from mobile applications. And you may want to make very good use of locally available renewable energy. Now, these are 4 reasons why you could want to do smart charging. There could be other reasons as well. And there is no reason why you should not combine those incentives. Now, we do this from our cloud platform, and the advantage of our platform is that we are basically charge point agnostic. We can work with any charger worldwide that supports the open charge point protocol. And this is roughly 99% of the chargers available on the worldwide markets. And the way we do this is a very simple abstract example. We construct a maximum capacity. In this example, it is just a red line, which is in this case kilowatts that we can provide as a maximum, regardless of how we came to this value, whether it be grid constraints or energy prices. We take the energy demand from a single car, which is represented by this blue block. And then if we don't do anything smart, if we don't control the charging, this is how it will look, which will obviously lead to bad results. So what we do instead, we allocate it to different cars in a smart way. And so the trick of our algorithms is to determine how to allocate those capacities, those volume energy packages to single cars. Now, a specific use case that we have is a very large office building that unfortunately wasn't built to house hundreds of chargers for different EVs. So its energy supply could only manage to deliver 400 amps in recently in 2018. Now, this means that either you have to stop somewhere at the charges that you add to this location, but this particular customer wanted to add more. So instead, what we do is we apply smart charging. And by doing this, we can actually give these chargers at most of the time a very high charge rate, which means that people actually charge faster. And because they didn't have to expand the local grid capacity, they could actually save a massive amount of infrastructural costs. Now, the way we do this is we look at the load profile from inflexible loads, so consumption that we cannot control, and we look at the grid capacity locally. And the difference between the two is actually what we can use for EV charging. And this capacity is the red line you saw in the graph earlier, and it's what we allocate to individual cars. Now, another use case I want to talk about is the electrification project. We ran this project in the UK for 3 years, together with several partners. A few of those are EA Technology, a consulting company that basically ran the project management, and the chargers involved were all Alfen chargers. Alfen is a supplier of charge stations that we frequently work with. And this is basically the geographics of the project, where we had roughly 700 chargers at people's homes. And we ran it operational for 2 years, with a lot of charging happening mostly at night. Now, what you would want ideally is to have the situation where all of these chargers are behind the same transformer, because that's the problem we'll eventually face. Unfortunately, we have not enough EVs in the UK market yet to place them all behind one transformer station, because that would mean they have to be in basically one neighborhood. So instead, we simulated that all these chargers were connected to one transformer station, but that was not actually true. Everything else in this project was real. The numbers are real, the charging events were real, and most importantly, the users were real. Now, what we did to come to a good smart charging setup was we took the consumption by households from these transformer stations and their data, and we took a capacity that could fluctuate over the day for these transformer stations, and that resulted in a capacity for EV charging. If you turn that graph around, and what you see at the bottom here is the actual EV charging capacity. And this is what we allocated to individual charging sessions in people's homes. And then what you can see is that the actual consumption is sometimes constrained, especially during the evening peak, and sometimes it's not constrained, and there's just not enough people charging to even manage them, which is obviously something desirable. This is some actual data from the project, and the way you should read this is that each of these little colored blocks is a charging session. So basically it's a car. And so these are the demands from those cars for a specific time frame, and it represents an energy demand. Now, what you can see again is during the evening peak, we are heavily controlling it. That means that we have to prioritize which car gets to charge and which car doesn't, and do that in a smart way. Without requiring too much information from individual users. Now, you can see that the actual control part is almost done at 10 in the evening, and it's only for a very specific amount of time that we actually control their charging. If we wouldn't do that, then basically what falls under this red line would be the only capacity we had available, because then we have to limit the chargers to add up to that particular red line. And that means that with smart charging applied to this situation, you can actually charge much faster, because you can actually make use of the capacity that becomes available at certain timestamps, which is, again, most parts of the day. Now, what we did during this project is we ran a couple of iterations. This was the first one, where we, on one hand, wanted to find out if this was technically feasible, but also if it was acceptable for individual users at their home to be controlled in their charging. I'll get back to that later. The second iteration was where we provided them with an app. And the functionality of this app is nowadays present in our continued app that's called Charge Assist. And this app allowed them with a very simple interface to press a button which had priority, which basically meant I'm in a hurry. And just by pressing that button, they could indicate to our algorithms that we needed to prioritize their charging so as to make sure that these people actually could drive again that same night in this case, without exceeding the capacity that was available for the entire grid. Now, what we saw happening here is that roughly 2% of the sessions were controlled in this way, which is a very acceptable result. Some challenges during the project, and I heard more or less the same thing in the previous presentation, is that many of the challenges revolve around data. There's not always availability of the data that you want. Sometimes you stop receiving the data because of network failures. Sometimes the cars don't communicate properly. You want to manage the data cost because most of these charges are connected through a cellular network where data cost can actually ruin your business case. And sometimes these cars have their own programmed behavior, which is again something we don't know about. Some learnings from the project is not only that demand management is technically feasible and that you can do this on a large scale with a cloud platform, but also that it's very acceptable to majorities of the participants. And that's something you can see here. This was measured in multiple surveys actually by a independent party. And what you can see here is that already before the trial, more or less 85% of the people responded that their charging arrangements were excellent. And the percentage hasn't really changed much over time after we did the multiple trials. So that's a very good result. Building up the data shows that there is evidence for a lot more opportunities. There's a lot of flexibility in EV charging. And building up this data in our platform helps future customers make the same progress and steps. It is, however, crucial to inform EV drivers and also to empower them. So the app that we used in the Electric Nation project is something that's continued now in our Charge Assist app to give users the feeling that they can always interfere if they have to. And the truth is that they almost never have to, but still they want to have that option. Now, this is the Charge Assist app that offers a few of those functionalities. And finally, we did a time of use incentive where we allowed users to set up when they want to charge, and we set up virtual tariffs for that. And basically, the choices customer made could result in a reward for them at the end of the project. What you saw is that this heavily increased the evening peak and delayed it. So the evening peak now occurred at 10 because that's when the cheap tariffs started kicking in. But it also became 3 times as high as the non-controlled peak, as you can see from the blue line. Now, this is something that grid operators might still be happy with because they still control the total amount of charging. But for energy suppliers, this means they suddenly have to turn on, well, maybe an extra nuclear reactor to actually power this, which is undesirable in this uncontrolled way. So we have shown that people are susceptible to this and that you can give them discounts to control their behavior, that you can include wholesale markets to control EV charging and take into account grid limitations, but you have to do it in the right way, which is something you can do through the Greenflux platform. Everything that we do is event-based, which means that we respond to events in real time and control the behavior of EV charging in real time. And most importantly, we can apply this today. We are doing this on a commercial basis and in projects, and everything that I just talked about is there to be used. For now, that's all I wanted to talk about.
That was very impressive, Nico. Thank you very much. I think you have some very, very instructive graphics in there. And it shows a different approach of load management. You highlighted again the importance of data and of incentives. This is something that I want to take into our discussion. I don't see any new questions. Audience, please don't be shy. These are very technical topics. Do not hesitate to ask us a question that is less technical and that is more related to your daily challenges, and we will try to bounce it here with our experts. All right, so I'll be monitoring the questions panel. In the meantime, Olly can kick off our discussion round, and I'm asking also Avi to come online again, please, so that we can have a round table, sure. Not around the table, around the computer, around the screen discussion.
Agreed. Okay, perhaps I'll kick off then with a quick question. It's probably more directed to Nico, but also Avi as well.
Mm-hmm.
Should smart charging be a default in terms of all electric vehicle chargers moving forward? And if so, what policies should we put in place to allow that to happen? Because from a UK perspective, I think all grant-funded EV chargers from now have to be smart, and they are looking to legislate to become any chargers that are sold to be smart as well. So I suppose if you could comment on that first, Nico, and then maybe Avi afterwards.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it's very good that every charge station is a connected charge station, one that supports an open protocol. We at Greenflux are very much in favor of open protocols, so that these chargers can be communicated with from platforms that have additional knowledge. And yes, I think that there's no way around managing charging by default. This does not mean that you always have to actively control them. It just means that you'll need to have that available as a scenario in case of need. And what you can see from the slides, from the graphs I showed, is that in most times of the day there is no reason at all to control anything. And after that, during the evening peak, yes, you would want to have a situation where the user doesn't have to do anything different. So you would not want to ask him to only plug in at 10 o'clock. Which means you have to have the availability to intercept in the behavior when people do plug in, as they will do at around the evening peak, and then only control them in a situation where it's necessary to preserve the grid. I think the alternative is a very costly one.
Okay, great, thanks. And Avi?
Yeah, I agree. I was also going to talk about open protocols, but Nico, you've covered that already. But that's really important. I think the standardization of the well, mainly the data transfer and control of these charges. I mean, I know that USEF, for example, is one organization that's working on these open protocols for flexibility. But that is very important, and also what I talked about, as in for cities and policymakers, for municipalities, is a shared data platform. For the cities, of course, there are issues around privacy and access, but these are not unsurmountable. And in places like Amsterdam, where there is a fairly good data platform, you really reap the benefits of people being able to come up with new concepts and ideas, and even businesses to tackle these challenges.
Yeah, totally agree. I think open data is crucial. I think in the UK we're learning the lesson of the Netherlands in terms of open data, and I think that's potentially catching up, but a little way behind. I suppose moving on from that, then, where do you see really good practices in terms of policies for smart charging and local flexibility take hold? Obviously, in the Netherlands to a certain extent, being you both there, but anywhere else you see it popping up? Go to Nico first. Sorry.
Yeah, so what we saw in the Netherlands is that quite early the grid operators actually founded a research institute called ELAT, where the only goal was basically to gather knowledge, to try things, work with the young and innovative companies that we see in the Netherlands. And I think that's a very good example of the right incentive. And what we see now in the UK is that energy suppliers and grid operators are seeing opportunities in smart charging to actually connect it to their energy buying. And so apart from a threat to the grid, you can also see it as an opportunity for your business models. And this is something we see coming from the UK. And I like that very much. I think that's also a very healthy incentive.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Nico. Avi?
Yeah, I was going to say that, one of the ways that policymakers can really make a difference is also setting targets and also setting examples through examples which are in your control. So, for example, in the EV energy project, we work with the city of Oslo, and of course, Oslo is one of the highest take-up of EVs. And what the city of Oslo has done is to look at their parking garages and make sure that their parking garages are sort of hubs of smart charging that they can test out in different ways at also different scales and different types of users, that they can gather all this experience and then scale up. So where you have your control, you can implement your projects, of course, if you have the budget, and of course, Interreg programs assist with that. Another example is again, in the C4City project in the Amsterdam Arena. The city of Amsterdam is working with the Arena to set up smart charging parking garages within their, within their massive stadium parking, basically. And then lastly, in London, we've been in contact with the Greater London Authority, who are in a Horizon 2020 project, the Sharing Cities project specifically, to set up an energy management system for their social housing, including smart charging of their maintenance EVs fleets. So yes, so these are ways to really show a good example, prove the business case and the benefits, and be a catalyst to spreading these.
Okay, great. Maybe another question, if I'll take the prerogative again. So Nico, you mentioned the fact that if we have quite set periods, so in terms of tariffs, potentially you just move the peak to a different time of the day, which doesn't necessarily help anyone. So is there kind of a default that we need fully dynamic time of use tariffs that change very quickly and rapidly throughout the day, rather than just kind of set tariff periods, off peak, on peak, that are a little bit inflexible and don't really provide the value and the opportunity of what you could get from fully flexible tariff structures? Nico again.
Yeah, so this actually goes back to my academic background as a control engineer, which is all about, well, basically you have two approaches there. You can do feed forward, right? So you're basically trying to predict what you need to do to control something, to control a certain system, which is what happens if you only apply the incentives, right? So you do the control first based on users and having them set their preferred tariff and charging behavior. And then the actual charging takes place, and you're no longer able to do anything about that. The other approach, the alternative, would be when you actually have a feedback cycle. So you're constantly using the information on what's going on in your electricity grid or in your energy supply system, and you actually translate that back to your control system. So instead of using a setting for these customers that they set once and then have to, then you have to deal with that, you want a feedback loop in that. And one of the ways to do this could be dynamic tariffs. You'd have to be very careful with communication around that, because if a user expects a certain tariff and that gets changed an hour into his charging, that's obviously not acceptable. So it is something more challenging, but I fear it's the only way to make this system work on a large scale, that you do feed back into the loop the actual data of what's going on. And that could mean, again, that could mean dynamic tariffs, or that could mean other incentives, where you have to take this user into account. You have to show him what's going on, but that does allow the energy suppliers and the grid operators to actively control the desired outcome.
Great, thanks for that. Avi?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to talk about that, and I sort of missed in my talk, is about also gamification as a part of user interaction. So Nico, what you're talking about in terms of really bringing the user along, and if you don't have the user along, there's really no chance of getting this done on scale. And that is that, for example, in Australia, where I come from, in the city of Melbourne, it's a highly competitive electricity market on the retail side. And then you have new companies who are coming up with very creative ways of selling energy, and partly through one of the best examples is a sort of gamified way of selling energy. So they sell energy through their app to their customers, but it is not listed as money. It is listed as units, and you have a certain amount of credits that you can spend, and you can say, oh, should I buy my wind energy for the night right now, or should I buy my winter packet right now and get a discount? Or let's say if it was EV charging, and the next day, of course, prediction is very important to have a good prediction. But let's say we have a good forecast that the next day is going to be congested at 6 p.m. And then it says, okay, at 6 p.m. You usually charge your car, but it's going to be congested. Would you like to sign up for a good deal if you charge at 9 p.m. instead? Of course, you're connected already, but the charging only starts at 9 p.m. So, you have this gamified way of doing it. And then you see, I think over time, you'll really build up an experience of how consumers interact with this. And there is already sort of proven businesses that are working on this model.
Yeah, I thought I'd just mention the fact that I think it was yesterday morning at 5:30 in the morning, there was a pricing in the UK for power that went through to domestic consumers where you could get -5 pence. So you would actually get paid to charge your EV using an Octopus Energy Agile tariff, which I think that is an incentive if you're being paid to charge your EV. But yeah, Katarina, did you have any more points or questions?
I have a question from our audience. There's the idea to use a joint approach between smart charging and an incentive for local storage, maybe with a household battery as a way to mitigate the stress on the grid. If that is feasible, do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, perhaps I'll start then. Just because that is exactly the core of the clean mobile energy project that we're working on. We're supporting the lead partner, which is the city of Arnhem in the Netherlands, together with London, Nottingham, and Schwäbisch Gmünd in Germany, and basically implementing an energy management system that's interoperable and modular to work in these different situations, different countries, to manage a set of local renewable energy, which in most cases solar panels on the roof, together with local battery storage and smart charging of vehicles, or even V2G enabled vehicles. And this is both in a situation where you have let's say a municipality depot, and you have control, a certain amount of control over your fleet and incentives for the drivers, or also in the public space in the city. So yeah, it's in progress for now, and it's really about getting the right system with the right data to manage this, and then at the end of the day, getting the right way to communicate to the end user.
Okay, Olly, any opinion on it?
Yeah, I would echo all those points really. I think it's all about the kind of control systems, again, all about the data, the predictive software. There's quite a few examples of trying to do that we're working on in the UK as well. So yes, I agree. It's all part of the package, definitely.
Nico, any additional points?
Well, yeah. So we often, especially right now, when you look at where is the business case for smart charging, we often see it in a local problem. So setting aside the supplier side, where you would want to work with the dynamic energy prices, if you look at the local problem of the grid, where you cannot supply the amount of power that you would want to supply to EV charging at that time, then you have a few options, right? You can expand the grid connection there, which is usually quite expensive. You can also build up a buffer, which could be a battery. And in some situations, this actually works out. We see some demand coming from, for example, electric buses, where you have to supply an immense amount of power in a very brief interval when this bus is actually charging. But we have to be careful that batteries are actually, the car is a driving battery, so there is already quite a lot of flexibility moving around. But apart from that, you'll have to be careful in where you see the business case for the additional home battery. And this really depends on also on a country basis. In the Netherlands, we have a very good working grid compared to other national grids. And this means that basically the grid becomes your battery. And we see a lot of future in a combination of smart systems working with the right incentives and with the grid as the immense battery behind it. But you will get very specific use cases where additional batteries are needed locally. And then it will work very well together with smart charging, for example. No doubt about that.
Okay, I mean, I come from the renewable energy world, and for decades we have actually been waiting for the e-vehicles to come along and to bring the additional storage capacity to the grid that the fluctuating renewables are maybe requiring. So we've always hoped that the e-vehicles would be part of the solution and not so much part of the problem. But I think we have understood through today's discussion that this can only happen if they are brought into the system in a well-managed way. And I would like to have a last round of questions to gather a little bit the recommendations for the policymakers. I mean, you know, this is all very technical, and of course you cannot do everything at once. So where to start? What can public bodies do besides the launching of demo projects in areas that are under their control, as in their parking garage and as in their public fleets, as you have already mentioned? What else are the takeaways for policymakers? Where to start and what to watch out most for, please? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I can say something about that. So I mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention it again. Open protocols. You really want the market to solve this, which means that governments and regional governments have to provide the right incentives, have to really stimulate innovations. But what you can see from basically together with the rise of e-mobility is that there are a lot of new companies with a lot of new incentives, which basically floats on a few developments that we see in a lot of other markets as well, which could be artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, which is becoming the Internet of Energy. You really want these innovative companies to solve the issue, and as long as you control them with the right incentives, that's the most important takeaway, I think. And we believe at Greenflux that this can only be achieved with open protocols and with a environment and ecosystem where all these companies are more or less forced to work together, because there is not going to be one single solution. There will be plenty of them, and they will have to work together.
Yeah, from my side, you know, as a consultant working with local governments, mainly, really, it's again what I was saying around, you know, having a good shared data platform is immensely useful in so many ways, not just to enable smart charging flexibility and also for the market to use, but also internally within the municipality, and also to set good examples, to show to the market what is possible, to demonstrate, and you can the best way, one of the best ways we find to do that is to collaborate with cities who are doing well, get into projects, get into consortia, and make use of you know, for example, Interreg funding calls, and make use of that opportunity to share the knowledge and experience, and also be able to get some budget to implement it yourself in your own situation, to see, does it actually work in my city or in my depot, or for my community. And I think to be able to experiment is really crucial in terms of, of course, we all know that you can't just copy and paste policy from other places to your own place and expect it to work. So you really do have to have these experiments to be able to see what works for you, what doesn't, and then to be able to scale up.
Yeah, I would echo all those points. I think I'd add one of the things coming across from a few good practices I've seen is any grant-based scheme and any procurement by local authorities or anything like that, having a minimum set of requirements within the contract or tender or whatever it may be on smart charging, to make sure that you're getting a good level of smart charging and good level of control, and that they match having a good data control platform, and that you're using the open charging protocols. So I think policymakers need to be aware of those and try to integrate those into their grant packages and also their tenders.
And in fact,
I think there's go on.
Sorry, Olly, to cut in, but in fact, just to point on that, I was just at the Amsterdam Arena's kickoff meeting for their V2G and Smart Charging Hub event yesterday. And one of the things that was clear, I mean, this was part of the C4 City project on the Interreg North Sea region, but one of the things that was clear is that, we talk about chargers having to have open protocols and as a minimum requirement, and it sounds easy, but it's not. And one of the reasons that procurement process was quite delayed in this C4 City project for the Arena, for example, was that they couldn't find chargers that met all of their specifications, and they wanted the most flexible and accessible, communicable charger, but they couldn't find it, and they could find basically one provider out of the many that could supply that. I think it's Switzerland in this case. So it sounds easy, but it's not. And as I think if you set these minimum specifications, then it becomes the norm for the market for these charging equipment manufacturers. And that really stimulates, I think that really changes the game, that stimulates the entire market, and that can only be helpful.
Yeah, totally agree with that. The only other thing I'd add in terms of control, so yeah, as you say, the grant schemes is really crucial, and then maybe mandating all chargers be smart from minimum requirement across the piece, because I think that and then really homing in on exactly what smart means, and to ensuring there's no ability for manufacturers to get around that, or any companies to get around that. And then I suppose alongside that is it's the upfront cost related to the operating cost. Sometimes spending a bit more in the upfront cost might reduce your operating costs over the time of the asset, because charging infrastructure is going to be in there for quite a while. So maybe making sure you get the right products in at the start will mean you spend less on maintaining and operating those assets over time. But that's a general point as well.
And just on that asset, just a short note here is that the EVs, once they're, or let's say buses and so on, who have a lot of batteries, once they're done, they're not, the batteries aren't dead. There are second life applications for those batteries. And I seem to be banging on about it, but again, in the Arena, they've set up a large stationary battery system at the Arena using, what was it, almost 150 Nissan Leaf batteries, probably from old taxis or so, to use for grid stabilization. And they have a business case for getting paid for providing grid frequency control or stabilization services. So, these are assets that are not just for the consumers or your fleets, there's also a second life to it that can be made use of.
I think they are very valuable takeaways. I do notice that you've insisted various times, and all of you on data and open data and platforms. Who would be responsible for launching these? Is this in the power of the public to decide to have this data public? I think City of Helsinki, for instance, has decided to put all the data public to foster innovation.
And in Amsterdam, there is the city government has a data lab, which is resourced with data scientists and other very specialized people who can deal with this sort of thing and be able to provide an open data platform. But we are also, or Amsterdam is also part of the SCORE project, SCORE, which is about fostering across European cities open data platforms for cities, for their citizens, exactly for this sort of purpose.
Okay, great. I would like to conclude with this. You have given us a lot of food for thought, and some of the aspects that you've mentioned, also like the tender specifications and the consideration of the life cycle system costs versus the initial upfront investment costs, bring us to the next topic that has also been in high demand at our latest workshop, which is like legal framework conditions and business models for e-mobility. And this is certainly something that we are going to look into and explore further in the framework of the policy learning platform. Now for the webinar today, of course, you will receive tomorrow the replays. We make all the presentations available to my speakers and co-moderator, Olly. A big thank you and a request. Can you share with us, beyond your presentations, the many good examples that you have mentioned in the discussions? If there are project references behind, I noted some down, but if you can collect them, then we can make this body of knowledge available to our participants, and they can follow up with. There has also been a request, which I have not read to you because it kind of did not fit anymore and came a little bit late. There is always a request on good practices on stakeholder engagement and how to bring people actually to participate in such schemes. Okay, this goes back probably to the incentives and how to set them, etc. So on that aspect, there's a big interest. Okay, so with that, thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you to the audience. And I do not want to go without advertising the other services of the policy learning platform. I want to have just a mention of our peer reviews. If any regional authority or local authority is having a policy level challenge and wants to have experts in a sort of private consultancy manner, we organize these experts and we organize these missions in two-day on-site visits, and then you can go much more in depth with the right experts, and we moderate the whole thing. It's very easy to apply for. Just check it out on the Interact Europe website, and we will provide you the link also in the summary tomorrow. So this is something that hasn't been used much by local authorities, but I think it's also relevant in the area of e-mobility, where all the cities and regions are trying to move forward, and everybody's insecure and needs to have knowledge now. So I think it's a very attractive offer. All right. So with that, I want to thank you for your patience, your contributions, and your questions. And goodbye until next time for the Policy Learning Platform and the Setup project. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.